Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Hot Mic Podcast. Hot Mic Podcast is where divergent points of view debate and discuss hot topics. I'm Nate the Barbarian. Welcome back. Happy Tuesday. Hope everybody's doing well. And let's get into the conversation. Let me take the image off and we can introduce today's crew. Everybody's here. We got Raven Mundy with us. What's up, Raven? How are you?
Good, and you?
Cannot complain. Got the voice of reason, Kevin Aldridge. How you doing, sir? I think Kevin Aldridge is frozen. What's up, Kevin? Yeah, he's frozen. And then we got Phil Hemlich with us. What's up, Phil?
Well, the problem is his views are somewhat frozen too. That's the problem.
Exactly. Phil always with the great one-liner, man.
I do want to say I do want to welcome. I don't know if if you can't hear me, it's no fun. But if you can, I do want to welcome Kevin back from the golf course, and I hope this podcast does not interfere with his tea time, anything like that.
Right. I'm sure that it won't. But Kevin, these things are less than perfect, no matter what you do. So hopefully he'll join us back here in just a couple of minutes. But I want to welcome in the audience as well. Good afternoon, audience. How are you? Hello. Good to see you. People just don't understand how powerful a like and a share is. Like it's very, very powerful. Very powerful. Just even one share, like you open the door to who's on your page. And if you care about it and you feel like doing it, I would appreciate it. Please like and share today's show. Looks like we got Kevin back, but he's got black screen. Black screen, Kevin. The voice of reason has a black screen. Okay, so I'll put him backstage. I can kind of monitor it and we can continue with the conversation. So hello to everybody, Pat, Rachel, Shauna, Regina, is that Angela? Appreciate you. Thank you, everybody. Good to see you. All right, let's get straight into it. And Kevin looks like Kevin's back. I think he's back. Let's see what's up. What's up, Kevin? Oh no. Not good. That's not working, bro. That is not working. It's so funny because up until we started, it was all good. But sometimes it's like that, Murphy's Law, whatever. I could politicize it and say the man is trying to keep us down, but I would be lying.
Calm down, Nathan. Let's not go overboard. Okay?
Yeah, let's not go overboard.
Let's try to lay off the incendiary rhetoric, okay? For once, okay?
Exactly. But let's get into it. So a lot of interesting things, a lot of hot topics. Let's start with some local stuff. There's nothing bigger than what's happening with PG Sinfield. PG Sinfield was pardoned by Donald Trump. Yeah, got the big pardon from the big guy, Donald Trump. And a lot of people are wondering how could something like this happen? Let's try Kevin again. It looks like he's working. What's up, Kevin? He's back. No, you're back. I had to just text him. You're back. We see you. There you go.
God may be saying something to us with this thing here,
Yeah.
Raven is much more scriptural than me, but it's possible.
It could be. It could be. Kevin was gonna drop some dimes and guy was like, you know what? No. Could be that. Kevin, you're back, man. We see you. He can't hear us. Not good. But anyway, so back to PG
Listen,
Sinfield.
I can be Kevin.
Nah, you
I
just
can
be
handle
you.
that. I just need to throw out a lot of left wing rhetoric, that kind of thing. It's not that
Oh, that's
difficult.
what he does. Okay, we'll let him know when he gets back that that's what you think
I
about
hope
what.
he can hear this.
I
I'm
don't think he
laying
can hear
out
any
this
of it.
week these weak attempts at humor for his benefit. So if he can't hear, it's kind of a waste.
Okay, you said it, not me. But what do you think about the fact that PG Sinfield was pardoned? What do you think?
Well, frankly, compared to all the other bribes that Trump took, or to pardon most of the other people, or uh, it's kind of mild in a way. I'm just curious if there was a connection between PG and Trump of some sort. In a way, I think it would be more honorable, almost, if there was, as opposed to Trump, who apparently just is freeing people. Anybody convicted of bribery and extortion, whether it's Bogdanovich or anybody, he's apparently pardoning, because I guess he feels that that shouldn't be against the law to take bribes and that kind of thing. What is most disgusting, of course, is this one of those people, the I forget the name, the mother gave $1 million to Trump, like within a week or two before the pardon, and it wasn't a campaign contribution. It was that for that silly crypto thing he has. Is basically bribing him with $1 million to release her son. That's about as low as you can get.
Yeah, yeah. So we're talking
Like,
about PG
he's
Sinfield.
selling. It's basically get out of jail free cards. And I'll tell you
Absolutely, he
something.
is.
As a former prosecutor, it is so discouraging, because basically what he's telling his Justice Department is, don't prosecute these cases. Don't prosecute bribery and extortion like they're phony crimes or something like that, which frankly are, the rule of law depends on prosecuting people who commit those kind of crimes.
Yeah. I think, if you look into this, and I kind of wrote this in a column responding to this, everything Donald Trump does is about covering for Donald Trump. This has less to do with PG Sittenfeld and any of the other folks that he released, as to cover up for his own illicit activities that he wants to do. Trump is trying to numb the public to this notion of what public corruption is, and he does that by trying to make it seem like some of these elected officials and others were treated so unfairly by the justice system, similarly to the way that he feels like he was treated unfairly. And he tries to blur these lines all the while he's collecting political donations and meme coin purchases from these people, to throw the scent off of what he and his family are doing to exploit the presidency. Donald Trump is fundamentally someone who doesn't believe in political corruption. He himself is super deep in it, and so all this is just trying to give cover for himself by freeing other people who are doing the same things, or in some cases worse things, and trying to make it seem like somehow or another there's prosecutorial overreach or other unfair treatment that's going on here. And PG Sittenfeld happened to be one of the fortunate recipients of this. Now, I think the one thing that we don't know and that you can probably guess, is that clearly Sittenfeld has somebody in his orbit who has some type of connection to Donald Trump, that was either willing to do him a favor, or slide him some donations under the table in some kind of way, whether it's through the meme coin purchases or some other thing. And that's probably how he arose to the top of the order here, because he's not a Rob Blagojevich, somebody who's kissing the ring or praising Trump, all of the things that Trump likes. Sittenfeld was publicly critical of him. So one can only reason that there's no other reason that Trump would even pay this guy any attention, is that he had somebody in his orbit who had Trump's ear or dropped him a few dollars.
What's sad too is what has happened to the whole institution of presidential pardons, because really, when used appropriately, and let's face it, Bill Clinton abused it, at least with one guy, but when used properly, it's really a wonderful mechanism to restore justice when there's been injustice. For example, a lot of, I think Biden, I believe, pardoned or gave clemency to a lot of relatively insignificant drug offenders who, because of outdated laws and so forth, were serving huge prison sentences. So that's what it's supposed to be used for. Or somebody who committed a crime, but let's say they're a model prisoner, they got their college degree. It's to reward someone for essentially repenting and going in a different direction. And the way it's supposed to work is there's supposed to be a pardon office that investigates these and then makes recommendations to the president. But for Trump, it's just a way of, as Kevin said, in effect freeing somebody that he got money from. And if you remember his first administration, he basically pardoned all of his pals. There was Manafort, who was serving a long sentence, Roger Stone, who lied to Congress. One of the most pathetic ones was Steve Bannon, who now is still considered a respectable guy today, and yet, according to the indictment, he was scamming all the Trump supporters for some build a wall private entity. And according to what he was charged with, he just kind of kept the money. So he was pardoned as well before they even got to try him.
I have to agree with Kevin. I have to say that by this point we know that Trump don't do nothing that ain't in his best interest. And so all of these pardons that have been given out, so to speak, have been for that particular purpose. Now, digging through and trying to figure out exactly what purpose that is, you can do that, but overall it is exactly what's been stated many of times. It's to blur some lines, it's to kind of appease some of his allies, especially some of his financiers. Like, this definitely has, bribery all written all over it. It definitely has I'm making these decisions based on the fact that I want to be able to set myself up for, once these 4 years are over, what's gonna come after this? How am I gonna, be able to sustain myself and sustain my wealth after I'm done here? Like, his entire political run has been nothing more than a yet another, you know, business transaction. Like, we've known this. It's why I just still have a hard time grasping the fact that people actually put him in office to do it. But we are where we are. We now are sitting under a president who has done nothing since his political run but use his office and his influence as a way to pad his pockets. This is just another activity that comes with that vein of thinking.
Yeah.
Glad to see it's not just me. Yeah, nothing else for me to say. Everything that you guys just both said. But what I will add is I think that there's an article, not I think, I know that Cincinnati.com, there's an article in which they had a little bit more detail about that connection you were talking about, Kevin. Apparently, it's one of PG's lawyers. One of PG's lawyers was doing some type of work for Doge and Elon. So there's a
Mhm.
connection right there. And that's what big money, high power connection gets you. It gets you, closer to the power. And Donald Trump is corrupt. I'm just like you, Raven. I don't understand these people who like thought that anything other than what you see was going to happen. I mean, he thinks like a criminal, and he's a crime boss. And so, matter of fact, there's an article. I can't remember. It's the Rolling Stones or the Atlantic or the New York Times. One of those three sources, but they talked in great detail about how Trump learned his lesson from the first term. And he's out to grift as much as he can because they were looking back like, man, we had all these opportunities to make money and we didn't do it because we were trying to be good people. Psh, bump all that. So now it's any way they can make money, any way they can gain influence is what you see from Donald Trump. And, all the people that voted for him, you got blood on your hands. I love to remind you, I'm not going to let you forget you put him in office. You created all of this, and you had a much better alternative. Do
I
you
hate to
think do you
I,
think this makes PG look better or worse, or is that not even a fair way of even asking it? I'm just
Well,
trying to turn. I'm just turning the pot here.
well, politically, I think. I mean, look, you can't look any worse than being convicted of some type of public corruption charges. Um, but I will say, within Democratic circles, it'll be interesting to see if he wasn't already tarnished by the conviction. Now you've got the acceptance of a Trump pardon on your list. I don't know how well that plays in Democratic circles as far as that goes. Now, would Sittenfeld cross over and become a Republican? Stranger things have happened. But I don't know that it makes his reputation per se any worse. I mean, it certainly doesn't help him. I mean, you've got a sketchy guy like Trump backing you up. It doesn't make you look any less sketchy. I'll just put it that way. One point while I've got the floor that I do want to bring in, and Nathan, you talked about the ability to have connections and money and power and influence. I mean, look, I'll get that there were some people who would say, "Hey, what PG Sittenfeld did was kind of on the line, right? It's kind of on the line of business as usual versus maybe he went a little bit too far in some of the ways that he went with these campaign donations." But if you just look at the way that the cases between he and Tamaya Denard and Jeff Pastor, sort of all panned out, and granted, Denard and Pastor's situations were among some people's characterizations, much more brazen. They took direct bribes, that sort of thing, money in their pocket, so forth and so on. But still, they went through the process, served every day, or most of the days of their criminal sentencing, and I think largely that had to do with the fact that there's a probably a pretty significant wealth gap between them and Sittenfeld, probably a pretty significant power and connections gap between them and Sittenfeld, the ability to even hire or consult, high priced attorneys like the two that Sittenfeld consulted that have connections with Trump. The other two folks just didn't have that. And as a result, PG Sittenfeld spent more time out of jail as he was going through this process than he did in jail. Meanwhile, you have, the two black council people who were convicted of public corruption and bribery as well, who had to serve pretty much the entirety of their sentences. And so, once again, this just shows us the inequality of the justice system, sort of as it exists. And I think if you're somebody, not affiliated with PG Sittenfeld or a part of his family, you can't help but look at this and say that justice was not fully served in his case comparatively to the other folks who were caught up in the corruption charges in Cincinnati. And so I think you continually look at this and you wonder why people complain and talk about racial and wealth divisions in the justice system. This case right here makes it readily apparent that the scales of justice are not equal.
I'd also like to submit too that this move itself could also be strategic, because if PG Sittenfeld has, because of being convicted of bribery and all these things, Nate said it. It's already hard for you to kind of come back from that, from your previous constituents who really, we were looking to see PG become the next mayor of Cincinnati. We, like, a lot of people really stood behind him, especially in minority communities. Maybe everybody wasn't on the same page, but a lot of us did kind of want to see him succeed. And so when you know that the same people who wanted him to succeed also don't align themselves with the policies and the political stance of MAGA or of Donald Trump, and then we also watched the same guy who disappointed us with his behavior in that seat by way of bribery and all these things. We also now it kind of doubles down on his, I guess, debauchery by being pardoned by Donald Trump. Could that not also be strategic in trying to influence the way the politics work in Cincinnati? If you take him off the table, or if you completely remove him from, the eligibility of being somebody we find to be even remotely worthy of a political seat, who else do we have left to then choose from? Who else do we, you know what I'm saying? We have to now find a new person to put all our hope and dreams in for a non-corrupt government locally. I think that like it kind of sounds just a slight bit complicated, but I don't think that it's, impossible, that the very act of pardoning a PG Sittenfeld is to kind of create that tension between his constituents and his voters, to now we now are forced to scramble and figure out, well, who do we lean on, who do we, give our lend our support to in the future when we're considering who becomes future leadership in Cincinnati. Because if none of the people that we trust in or we care about align with our values or align with the things that we like to see in the city, what do we do? I think that it's worth thinking about it in that way. I think that it ain't just, I think it's kind of surface level to think that, well, maybe it's only just because it's a miscarriage of justice and this is just white privilege. I think it might actually be a little bit more than that. I think it might actually be very strategic on Donald Trump's part and on people who align themselves with him. I think that it's very possible that somebody who previously found themselves on the opposing side of a PG Sittenfeld may have encouraged for him to be pardoned, because it if you know that what Donald Trump represents to people who used to be his constituents is debauchery, is corruption, and you pardon him, you seem to align yourself with him, or at least by proximity, PG aligns himself with Donald Trump by accepting the pardon. You kind of take the wind out of his sails, and now the people who were previously, willing to vote for that kind of a guy are now left scrambling. Now we're looking for the next person to put all our hopes and dreams in.
I a lot of stuff there that both of you said. I could circle back, but I'm not. But I agree with you. It's like it's a blurring of the lines effect, Raven. Like, there's people out there who are going to be thinking things like, well, if Trump pardoned them, they must have been innocent. The system's corrupt. So there's definitely a blurring of the lines. There's definitely a toxic effect that's happening, but we are where we are. But you brought up Tamaya Denard, Kevin. Tamaya Denard put this on Facebook. And I got to think it was kind of like, people were calling and reaching out to her because of her association with PG Sittenfeld and some of the similarities. But she wrote on Facebook, so many of you have been reaching out today, and I truly appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. But just so we're clear, at my request, my attorney did not pursue a pardon from the Trump administration. And to be completely honest, I don't want anything from the Trump administration. For me, the ends don't always justify the means. And as you see at this point, I'm not sure when I got this, maybe a couple days ago.
And I would say her words go against the whole concept that there's some racial or class thing going on here. She's just saying I didn't pursue it. And the fact is, I believe, I could be wrong, I believe the same U.S. attorney, I think his name is Ken Parker, if I'm correct, I think he handled all three cases. And he's an African American guy. And I don't think he gave any bargains or anything to PG, because in fact, if you notice, he was very critical of Trump issuing the pardon. I mean, to me, yeah, he appealed. He had the money to appeal it. But if Trump hadn't pardoned him, I can almost guarantee you the U.S. Supreme Court would not have taken the case, and he would have gone and served his full sentence. So this is a strictly a Donald Trump thing. Now, if Trump pardoned him because of his race or how much money the guy had, nothing we could do about that. But other than Trump's choice, I don't think there was anything racial here or what class the person's in. It's just simply what Donald
Yeah,
Trump did.
I think you.
He didn't, in other words, Sittenfeld didn't receive any, I can guarantee you, in that prosecution. And I would also say the evidence against him, I felt, was much, as Kevin said, much weaker against the other two, because they just took bribes. He took a campaign contribution. But I don't think he got any breaks or any more breaks than the other two did, especially certainly from
Well, he
the
was born
Yeah,
into
Phil, I
prosecution.
breaks.
think you.
He
think
was
you
born
kind of. I
into
think you
breaks,
kind of
Phil.
miss.
That's
Yeah,
the
no,
point.
Yeah, hold on for a second, Nathan. Because I think Phil is missing the point that I was making. It's not that the prosecution was any more vigorous against PG Sittenfeld than it was against Tamaya Denard or Jeff Pastor. I agree with you. Was it?
You mean
Yeah,
less
any less
less
vigorous.
vigorous?
I agree with you on that. That's not my point. I guess my point is that the wealth gap, right? The wealth gap that exists between whites and blacks in this country afford wait, let me finish my
They
point, Phil.
all
Let me
three
finish
took
my point.
bribes.
Let me finish my point.
Okay, all right,
The
okay.
wealth gap that
Yeah,
exists
on your
that
neck.
is a lot of which has racial implications on it, affords people like PG Sittenfeld, or even if you want to go into race and say someone like an OJ Simpson, who can afford to pay for high priced attorneys who have connections to people with Donald Trump, whereas someone like a Tamaya Denard or a Jeff Pastor, who has less resources, who can't afford to, hey, let's go to court and fight it. Because in my opinion, even though while PG Sittenfeld was more on the line, I still think he was guilty. And, a jury ultimately found that. He just had the resources to be able to say, hey, I'm going to roll the dice and take it to court and then appeal it. A lot of people don't have the money or the financial wherewithal to be able to extend a court case to that extent, to get the favorability, the types of favorability things that PG Sittenfeld found in this case. So it is a class thing. It is a wealth thing. And because we know of the big difference when it comes to wealth and class, that ultimately comes down to race. So you do see it there. That doesn't mean that there was less vigorous pursuit of PG Sittenfeld. It just means that, hey, if you got money and you got connections, the system is much more open to you than it is to somebody else. And that's just the fact. I don't care what you say.
Yeah, that's the way America was built. And she works the way she was built. But what do you think about Tamaya Denard's post? I mean, basically, she was saying, like, look, I didn't want a pardon. It almost came off to me like she was saying, I specifically don't want nothing to do with the Trump administration.
That's
And
exactly what
people
she
were
said.
like, what do you
That's
say?
exactly what she said. And I would even go as far as saying that if I were somebody who were to come across her post while scrolling on Facebook after just finding out that PG Sittenfeld was, pardoned, it's in that second little piece where she said, but just so we're clear, at my request, my attorney did not pursue a pardon from the Trump administration. That sentence alone, like, I know that it's her saying that, this is not even something that we even considered. It also kind of, just personally, it also kind of feels like she's saying, just so you know, these pardons have been pursued. Like these
Right. I
pardons
got
have
that
been
too.
these pardons have been, asked for. This is not just something that, uh, from the kindness of his heart, that Donald Trump decided to do for a random city council member in Cincinnati, Ohio. This was something that PG Sittenfeld attorneys or whoever his team is, they pursued it. And so I think that it kind of lends to the idea that I was kind of trying to explain before, which is this ain't just something that, we can write off as white privilege when it comes to, or even class privilege as it comes to the justice system. This is something that was actively pursued. This was something that was looked at as a viable option to get me out of this corner that I painted myself in. And I think that it again reinforces that idea of PG was a guy that a lot of people were prepared to stand behind and put all their faith in. And how do we, as citizens of Cincinnati, of Hamilton County, how do we recover? How do we regroup? How do we re-strategize? And how do we go about picking better and more trustworthy leaders at this point?
Well, I think you gotta, look, money in politics is a big thing. I think this is forever something that we're going to be wrestling with, whether it's corruption or who can you trust or all of this, as long as money plays as prominent a role as it does in elections and in campaigns, because it keeps, I mean, as we saw in the Sittenfeld case, it makes a lot of these politicians open to influence and persuasion by big money interests who want to come in and buy their vote or influence their vote. And so there are many different ways that people have tried to get at campaign finance. But the big money interests and the powers that be are not going to let that happen, because they want to continue to control and influence these politicians, through their dollars. That's why one of the scary things about, I know Phil said that PG's case would have probably never made it to the Supreme Court, but one of the scary things is, had it made it to the Supreme Court, the defense, the First Amendment defense that his attorneys were trying to argue, could have opened a Pandora's box that would have made it very difficult, should they have sided with Sittenfeld and his attorneys, which this Supreme Court is capable of anything, could have made it very hard to prosecute political corruption cases, and you could have wound up with a situation very similar to Citizens United, which opened up a Pandora's box for campaign contributions to political.
Actually, Kevin, they've already essentially rendered that decision. The Supreme Court has made it very difficult to prosecute bribery of public officials. It goes back to the McDonald case in Virginia, which, if you remember, he was convicted. He and his wife convicted of taking all kinds of money, and it went to the U.S. Supreme Court. And what they said was, even if you give money to the guy, unless you can show a quid pro quo, he's innocent. Okay, and that right there is the essential equivalent of the Citizens United. So they've already set a very high bar to convict public officials of taking money. And if you're a public official, all you got to do is, like Trump is, just take the money, just take whatever it is, and just make sure that there's no clear quid
Yeah,
pro quo.
yeah, that's fair enough. That's a fair argument there, Phil. You're right.
Can PG Sinfield make a comeback? My answer is yes. He could. He could. I could see him running for office and winning. It'd have to be the right audience, the right office, at the right time. But what do you think? Or has he already made his comeback?
Hey,
I
if
think that he'll
Donald Trump,
definitely make his comeback with softer Republicans. I think
yeah,
that, and maybe even harder Democrats. Like there's that middle ground where, there are, believe it or not, there are Democrats who tend to lean more on the conservative side, who might agree with some of the things that come out of Donald Trump's mouth here and there. And I also think that there are some softer Republicans who don't agree with everything that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth, but here and there he might say something that resonates with them, and so they're willing to go in and vote for him like they did in November because they'd rather have him over a Kamala Harris or Joe Biden. I think that if he plays towards that particular crowd, for absolutely he'd be able to find his way back into a position of power. Absolutely.
yeah, if Donald Trump can win re-election after 34 felony convictions, certainly it's possible for PG Sittenfeld to re-enter the political arena and win an election again. Now, will he? I don't know. If I were a betting person, as of where it stands right now, I think Sittenfeld's gonna probably cut his losses. Count this as a lesson learned. I don't know how much influence his wife and his family has on his future decisions, but they may be saying, "Hey, look, we've had enough. We're lucky to get out of this situation as we have. Let's not invite any more smoke." So again, I don't know what the conversations are in the Sittenfeld household and how much he listens to his wife, but I can imagine after having gone through something like this for a couple of years, I can probably tell you what my wife would say if I was in his position and even intimated that I wanted to go back into politics after this. So I don't know. Maybe I can't speak to what the nature of their relationship is, but I would be skeptical of Sittenfeld, particularly since he said it that he's made peace with being out of politics. I would be surprised if he did anything anytime soon.
Yeah, but he said that. He
There's an
said that
interesting
when he had
go.
no future in politics in the near future. So you never know, man. The fun is in the run. You never know. Go ahead, Phil.
Well, I think there's an interesting contrast, speaking of his desire to have future office. If you contrast, and even though it's a long time ago, if you contrast his situation with Jerry Springer, for you younger folks who may not remember, Jerry Springer, we'll talk about being stupid. He went to a prostitute over in Newport and he wrote a personal check. So, any of you listening today, if you are going to go to a prostitute, do not write a personal check. Okay, that's one lesson. But
We don't write checks
two,
anymore, Phil, so we're
two,
Right.
That's
good.
what I was gonna say, Phil. I think checks are.
well, also don't, yeah, but
Don't
don't
Venmo.
Venmo either. Okay, it's the same principle applies, or use a credit card. But the the thing about Jerry Springer, and I think this is reflective of how the people in this country look at these things. He didn't contest it. Okay, he basically said, "I screwed up," and so he was reelected, and I became mayor as well. Not that I have any, never liked his particular TV show, but the point is, Sittenfeld hasn't really shown. It wasn't one of these where he said, "Look, I was wrong. I let my constituents down." Blah blah blah. I think had he done that, even whether he got a pardon or not or whatever, had he taken that attitude, I think he definitely would have a political future.
Well, he can still take that attitude. He could come out and
It's a little late though when you've contested the whole
it's
thing all
never too late.
along.
It's never too late in the new world and reality that Donald Trump has shaped now. I mean, there's so much anti-establishment, anti-legal system sentiment out there that if he gets in front of the right audience and says the right things, they'll eat it up like butter.
And
They'll,
I
they'll,
You
think
guys
that'll
are
be
you
what
guys
they'll
are
the
eat it
show
up.
is as a politician. I believe that if he does decide to get back in the political arena, and depending on what his stance is, it'll actually give us a clear understanding of who he is as a politician. Because we've known Sittenfeld to be pretty progressive in his past, and that's again why a lot of people respected him and wanted to see him become the next mayor of Cincinnati. Because I would say, and may correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that Cincinnati is a pretty progressive city overall. And I think that he kind of fit the bill for what people consider Cincinnati to be. But I think that if he comes back out and he's very, anti, justice and anti that process of going through and being held accountable for bribery, because we can say that he didn't take a brazen bribe, but it was bribery. It was just a different vehicle for it. If he comes out and he starts making those very Trump-esque claims of corruption and collusion, and they was trying to get me and they thought they got me, but Trump saw I was a great guy, and like all of those different things. Like if he does that same thing that we've seen a lot of these guys who have now gotten caught up in corruption, if he tried to say that it was some kind of political strategy to get him up through or something like that, we'll actually see who he is as a politician. And then it'll be up to us. It'll be up to us, the voters, the taxpayers, to decide whether or not we're actually going to allow ourselves to be subject to this kind of politician once again. We're literally watching the results of being subject to that kind of a politician since November. We've watched what that is. We've watched what somebody who has been, or at least we've tried to hold accountable for his actions, how when you don't actually hold that guy accountable, he gets even worse. We've seen what that is, and we've been watching it happen since November. If we, as Cincinnatians, as Hamiltonians, if we don't decide that that guy, if he comes out and kind of becomes a soft MAGA or whatever you want to call it, if that guy has the chance to step back into the spotlight, of course the Trump supporters are gonna vote for him. But are we, those of us who I feel have more common sense, if we decide that we're going to continue to stand behind that guy, that's more on us than it is on him. Because now
yeah.
we've been given a pretty clear picture.
Here's what I say. I agree with Phil on this point. Sinfeld can't come out now and be like, "Yeah, you know what? I did it. I'm sorry. Please forgive me." That's not going to work for him. He needs to double down on the defense that he said. And here's two reasons. One thing that
Your audio.
society, one thing that's
Hey, Kevin, your audio is really jacked up right now.
oh, okay. I'm not sure. Is it better?
Give me
Is it
one.
any better?
Give it a second here. Yeah, It just went all crazy for a second.
Okay. Um, yeah, what I was saying is that he needs to take a play out of the Trump playbook in this regard. He needs to stick with his.
Nah, we can't even hear you, bro.
All right.
Yeah, we can't even hear you at all. Okay, so it looks like Kevin he tapped out. He's going to turn back in. All right, he's already back in. Let's see if it's better now.
All right. Is it any better now?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I'm not sure what was going on there. But yeah, like I was saying, I think that he needs to stick with the Trump playbook in terms of sticking with his story. And the reason why I say that, and one of the things that Trump knows is that the apology oftentimes is worse than the double down or sticking to your guns. I mean, look, Sittenfeld has been adamant that he's innocent, that he didn't do anything wrong. A lot of people who support him and believe in that. Now, if he comes back and says now, like, yeah, I was just tripping, I was wrong. What does that do to all the people who put their reputation, their name, their support behind him, believing him to be innocent all along? Now you've made a fool out of me, so I'm less likely to really support you now. So, and plus, any opponent that he's going up against will crucify him under the fact that now he's admitted to being guilty after going through the taking wasting taxpayer money and going through all of this proclaiming his innocence. So this notion of, hey, mea culpa, come out, that sounds good, and that's one of the reasons why I think Democrats often struggle and lose, is because they don't make the calculation and understand that sometimes the apology is worse than just sticking to your guns and staying where you're at. Trump and the Republicans have learned that, and it's worked for them. PG Sinfield better recognize that and stick to his story.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. More local story here. Let's move on. Cincinnati police officers are suing the city of Cincinnati, alleging racial bias against white Cincinnati police lieutenants. You guys heard about this? Several high-ranking Cincinnati police officers are now suing the city, claiming that the department's leadership is discriminating against white lieutenants in making decisions, assignment decisions. The officers say they've been skipped over for assignments. Some really, apparently some assignments are better than others because it could lead to career advancement. And those, like, really nice assignments, those are the ones that, this is what I'm gathering from the article, those are the ones that these white officers are have an issue about. Quote, the city and Chief Thigi have actively and systematically undertaken efforts to promote, advance, and make promotion and assignment decisions that are preferable to women and minorities and to the exclusion of white men. That's what the lawsuit says. Now, I don't have any great insights on the lawsuits. It's just my gut, and I'm if I'm cynical, then so what? I'm cynical, but I'm cynical about all of this. I feel like there are white people, these white officers may be trying to take advantage of the current environment under Trump, where all of a sudden white people have been oppressed and white men has been so greatly oppressed. I mean, white men have been so oppressed that y'all just run and control everything and got all the damn money. But somehow I'm supposed to believe that the Cincinnati Police Department is discriminating against white lieutenants. I don't know if it's frivolous or not. My gut feels like it's a bunch of garbage. And I hope the city fights it to the very end and never settles. If in fact they have the facts on their hand, right? But that's just me. What do you think about this?
I think that it's an interesting consequence of a circumstance that the city of Cincinnati has found itself in for years now. When you have a history of white officers not responding to minority communities in an appropriate way, and then you try to address that issue by putting officers in those areas and giving officers those assignments who are better at making relatable connections to said community, and those officers tend to be officers who reflect that community, i.e. black or minority officers. The consequences of not truly addressing the problem, which is training your white officers to be better responders to black and minority communities, is you're going to have a whole lot more black and minority officers stepping into those roles. That's what the fix was. That's what the consequence of actions is. We're looking at the consequence of an action. White officers have not historically responded to communities of minorities in an appropriate way. And so to mitigate that issue, what's happened is CPD has actually done a good thing. They have placed officers who better relate to those communities in those assignments, in those positions, and they have also reaped the benefits of being good at their job by responding to those communities in appropriate ways, and they're finding themselves in positions of career advancement. The complaint should not, in my opinion, the complaint shouldn't be, well, I'm as a white officer, I'm not being assigned to this particular assignment based on my race. What it should be is I have not been offered as an officer, as a white officer, the kind of training that would make me better equipped to serve this particular community, and that has stopped me from advancing, because that's the issue that's being posed here, but it's being done in a way that undermines the actual issue at hand, which is not enough white officers know how to respond appropriately to a minority community. If you truly desire career advancement, why are you not going to your leadership and saying, if you feel that I am not appropriate, if I'm not being, I don't have what it takes to respond correctly to this community, what is it that I'm missing? What training do I lack? Where give me feedback. Tell me where I lack that I'm not appropriate enough to be assigned here. And then if your leadership is telling you, well, we made certain decisions because we believe that certain communities respond better to this kind of officer. Well, how can I be more closely aligned to being this kind of officer regardless of my skin color? I know that historically they might respond to somebody with who looks like them, but how do I show up as a white officer, because I'll never be able to be a minority? So how do I show up as a white officer in these communities and I still be able to create that level of relatability to this community? How do I do that? Why is that not the first thought? If you truly have signed up to protect and serve, why is that not your first thought and not, oh, they're discriminating me against me because I'm white? Do you actually care about that community? Or is this just, I feel like I deserve it because I'm entitled to everything else in my life. I feel I'm entitled to this as well. Are you? Or do you only want this job because you feel like you're entitled to it? Do you actually want to be good at this job? Do you actually care about the community that you're demanding to serve? Or do you feel entitled to this position because you believe it comes with career advancement and more money and all these other things? I think that the faux anger is misdirected and it's purposeful. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I kind of think like, well, I'll start out by saying this, that I think any any preferential treatment, whether it's for white folks, whether it's for black folks, whether it's for women, whether it's from whomever, is should not be a factor in making determinations in terms of where people promotions, where people get served, who gets hired, whatever. I'll say that off the top. The problem is that historically that has not been the case, and I think what you've seen, not just in Cincinnati Police Department, but across the landscape, is this effort to sort of right size or get things right as it pertains to racial and gender opportunities, whether that's in the police force, whether that's in corporate America, whether that's whatever. We know that there is a large disparity in the workplace between whites and minority groups that has largely been and historically been based in discrimination against those groups. And so a lot of efforts have been made over the last 50 or 60 years to rectify and create that. Now, there would be some, and I'm sure that Phil would be among those who would argue, hey, haven't we reached the point where we shouldn't have to do that any longer, right? That haven't we graduated to the point where we don't have to come up with special programs or make special decrees or dispensations to make sure that equality is taking place in our workforce. And I would agree with that. But as I often say on this program, the reality of what the world is versus what we would like it to be are two very different things. Here's what the CPD needs to come up with. It's some clear, concrete criteria, and maybe they already have this, that explains how promotions and prime opportunities are doled out to individuals. I read in the complaint where some of the white officers said they felt like they were more qualified than the officers who got opportunities. Okay, under what grounds and under what basis are you saying that you're more qualified? Is it seniority? Is it training? Is it testing? What is it that makes you feel like you are more qualified and more up for these opportunities than someplace else? Because if CPD doesn't have any kind of criteria like that determines that, then it does become kind of a subjective decision that is much more obscure, that one could say to a lot of the things that Raven spoke to, right? Like, hey, we think, because I'm the police chief, I think this officer, through my subjective evaluation, would be better serving in this particular area than another officer. So if you don't have those kind of concrete criteria in place that can determine how promotions and plum assignments are given, then you leave yourself open to this kind of obscure, vague, hey, I think I'm more qualified than this person, and I think I'm being passed over because it's a woman or somebody who was black. Now Don Lee in the comments, and Don has a past connection to CPD, talked about how the city manager and the police chief made it clear that they had an agenda to promote women within the department. And if that's true, I think if the police chief and the city manager, who are both women, if they came out and made those types of declarative statements, I would say that that is absolutely a mistake on their part and an error on their part, because it sets the ground for these types of lawsuits. When you come out and say, "Hey, our goal is to promote women," at the expense of somebody else, you open the door for this type of thing.
No,
And I don't know that it's true that
no.
that's what they said. I'm just saying, I'm just responding to what
But
he
if that
said, and I'm saying,
statement, if that statement was to address the fact that women felt they were being discriminated against and that they were not receiving opportunities, then where do you draw the line of discrimination? You know what I
so
mean?
so
Like
I,
it.
but Raven, I think there's a difference between saying, hey, we're going to move heaven and earth to make sure that women are not discriminated against in our department, and coming out and saying matter of factly that we are going to promote women come hell or high water. Those are two different statements.
I'm not sure they said hella high water
Well,
because that kind of changes it.
I'm obviously I'm elaborating a little bit
Yeah,
on that, Nathan. But even if they came out, even if they used less hyperbolic language, any declarative statement to say that regardless of whatever, we're going to promote more women, I just don't think is a smart statement
I think it's
to
an
make.
excellent statement. It's a smart statement to make. It's an excellent statement. And one thing we cannot do is we cannot yield who we are and what we know is the right thing to do just because there's a lot of pressure from the current administration and some things are changing around us. No, I mean, if they made a statement that, we're going to do our best to make sure that we don't overlook qualified women because qualified women have been overlooked in the police force for 150 years. That's the right thing to do. Just because somebody files a lawsuit, it could just be frivolous. There's a lot of frivolous lawsuits. So I don't know. But what I will say is that, I don't know these people personally behind this. So it's not a personal attack, kind of, but it kind of is going to sound like it is. But these are just bad people. These are just bad white folks who are looking at the situation like, oh, we got Trump in office and everything is DEI. And look at what the Supreme Court said. And they're just trying to mack the system because they know in their hearts, like everybody else, that the efforts to bring minorities into the police department is good. This is just straight up arrogance. It's just viciousness, right? That's just straight up viciousness. Like, I'm just going to try to capitalize off the moment because they were trying to promote women as if that's a bad thing to do. But that's what human beings do. It's all about me, me, me. If they can get a couple 100,000 or more than that, or maybe get to the front of the line, that's what human beings do. It's all about the individual. Nobody cares about the next man or woman. And that's the reason why our world is the way it is right now. Phil's about to fall asleep. What do you think, Phil?
Oh, I'm not falling asleep. Believe me, I'm not falling asleep at all. Well, I can tell you, having spent 8 years on city council and followed it pretty closely, I just got to be honest. I saw uh, clear favoritism toward African Americans and to some extent women over whites in a number of areas,
Good,
policing included.
good.
And I can
Yes, sir.
can I finish? Okay. Look, if you're saying that you think it's good to discriminate on behalf of blacks or women, then fine. Then you got what you wanted. I'm just affirming that that is
No,
what I saw
that's
happen.
not
And I think
discrimination.
I've used this example. Can I
Yes, sir.
finish, please? Do you mind? No, go ahead. Go
No,
ahead,
I
Nathan.
just
You
wanted to
talk,
interject
then
and just say
I'll
that.
talk. Oh no, no, no,
Well, I
no.
mean,
Go
all
ahead.
I'll
I'll
say
wait.
is that, you know, I just feel like the efforts to support women who we know historically and or black people who we all know that black people have been historically discriminated against. We all know this. So why are we acting like the efforts to try to do something to right that centuries long wrong are now somehow the wrong thing to do? It's the right thing to do. These are just bad people who are trying to game the system and game the moment.
Let me just say, you have no right, unless you know those officers that filed that suit. You have no right to say they're bad people. That's what Trump does. Anybody who's against him, they're bad people, bad people. And so I would just say right off the bat that that is a terrible thing to
It's a
say, that
terrible thing to
somebody's a bad
do.
person
For
when you
sure.
don't know them. You not only don't know them, but as far as the facts here, and Kevin said, well, it's a sketchy thing. They need to be have
This
clear
is race
regulations.
baiting, Phil.
I got news.
This
I
is
got
race
news for you.
baiting.
Well, all right, go ahead. No, that's all right.
Phil,
You don't
you
want to let me
hate
finish.
race.
That's
This
okay.
is race
No, go ahead.
baiting 101. That's all. That's all.
No,
It's
it's
race
rape.
baiting.
No, it isn't. It isn't. All right.
It's
You
just
know
my
better.
opinion.
Okay,
I don't
fine.
know.
Nathan, I don't disagree with you on that. I think this lawsuit comes at a time where you see a lot of pushback, particularly from Trump, about DEI policies. I think that this lawsuit is it's no coincidence that it's in the same vein of where you're at the same time you're seeing this pushback on DEI. However, one of the things that I will say to you, that one of the things that's been consistent over the last 4 to 8 years is this sense among white men, particularly white Republican men, that they are among the most discriminated groups in the country. And a lot of this is because what you have seen is the rise of women, in the workplace, minorities in the workplace who have gotten more opportunities. And I've said that one of the problems in general overall with the majority community is that more for me means less for you. And that's always going to be the rub. Anytime I have to give up more of what I'm used to getting so that you can have more, I'm going to have a problem with that, right? It's like, okay, before I was getting $10, now I'm going to have to settle for 7 so that you can have 3 more. I don't, that's always going to look like it's unfair. That's always going to look discriminatory to the person who's got to give up the $3 unless they have the heart and mind to understand that, hey, the only reason you got $10 in the first place is because those people that we're giving the extra 3 to were denied that 3. And I always say that that is the part that the majority community in this country never wants to acknowledge. They want to say, yeah, racism and discrimination was wrong, and I'm sorry that that happened to you, but I'm not willing to sacrifice anything that I have to make it right. And that's the problem that we're going to perpetually have in this country. Now, I will agree with you. Everybody wants is a fair shot and to have a merit-based system. But here's the reality of
No, no, no. Nathan doesn't.
no, no,
Nathan wants
no.
it the
But
other
here's
way
the
around.
problem.
He
But
just said
here's
he
but
supports
No,
but
discriminating in
Phil,
favor
here's
of
the
blacks and
but
problem.
women.
But here's the
But he's
problem. Here's
entitled
the
to his
problem with
opinion.
the merit-based system that the majority community will never acknowledge. Right? There's no coincidence that when white men are in power, the majority of people who have commanding positions are white men. There's no coincidence that when women and black people or other minorities get in power, that there suddenly appears to be more women, more minorities, more people like that who have opportunities. The bias that exists in all of us, white people want to somehow imagine, because they want to believe that they're this enlightened and benevolent group that never has any bias or discrimination. They can't see the fact that, oh, for 50 or 60 years in the Cincinnati Police Department, white men were the only ones who were getting promotions and plum assignments. Gee, was that because somehow or another it's an arrogance to believe that that only happened because they were the most qualified people out there? And that's just bullshit. Pardon my French, Phil. If you believe that, there's something wrong with your mental capacity or logic to think that somewhere along the way that there was just like one black or one woman in like 50 or 60 years who was up for that job. That's ridiculous that anybody would subscribe to that. But that's what you're asking women and minorities to believe in this case. Sorry, I went off on a diatribe, but that just boggles my mind to whenever I see white people and you look around and you only see 1 or 2 or a handful of women or black people in some place. Do you just assume that those are the only 2 or 3 qualified black men or women in all of Cincinnati who are good enough to work where you work? Or is something else at play there?
Phil, the floor is yours.
as I was saying, I can just tell you from my experience, and this has nothing to do with what happened in the last 50 years. Okay, there's nothing to do. At least I'm just giving you my observations while I was in office and since then. Just my observations. Okay, I wasn't around in the 60s, 70s, 80s. I was alive, but I wasn't an adult and wasn't in politics. I can tell you that I saw during my time some clear uh, bias in favor of blacks and to some extent females. And I, just to give you a couple examples, I can remember, and I shared this before. One time there was I won't use his name, but he was a fairly prominent African American officer who had done some just the evidence was pretty clear against him. He was involved in domestic violence, this kind of stuff. And because of the members of city council wanted to play up for votes, they dragged the city manager, okay, and basically pressed him and forced him. And Damon Lynch III was there, and they pressed him to drop the case against the officer. I saw that happen a couple times. I've even in the area of business. I think we talked one time about that mahoganies or whatever it was. There was a clear favoritism for black businesses over white businesses. Now, again, I'm not saying anything that happened 50 years before. I'm just telling you my observations. And before anybody jumps to conclusions about what happened in this case, people in this case are going to have to raise their hand, take the oath, and they're going to have to testify. And I'm not making any predictions, but I would advise everyone to wait until they take the oath and others who they're suing take the oath, and let's see
Here's
what
the
the
other thing you
evidence
Phil,
got
let
to
me ask
shows.
you
remember.
this real quick though. You point out one or two cases of blacks. Let me ask you, how many times did you see that with white officers when you were on council? And how many
Where I
times
saw
did you
that
see how many
they were
times did
brought
you
in.
see favoritism towards white businesses on city council? And how many times did you see people overlooking ill activity of among white officers or other folks? And I'm venturing, you shook your head. I'm venturing you're going to say none. And if that's the case, that shows the blindness that you have, because when you look, you don't see the favoritism that goes to white businesses, and oftentimes probably don't hear about some of the under the table wink and nod what white officers or others get away with that don't even make it to council. I've said this before. Black people have to raise hell because that's the only way that we get stuff done. You guys don't do it that way. You do it behind the scenes, behind closed doors, wink and a nod, good old boys club. Now, if you want to sit there and tell me in all your years of politics that you've seen no favoritism towards white businesses or white people getting over, then that says a lot.
Nothing. Phil, no words, no comeback. No, man. Have some music or some kind of sound effect.
It doesn't mean I agree. Well, let me say this. I think whenever you point at any particular race and say you guys, whether it's toward blacks or whites, I don't think that's a positive. That's a helpful
But
thing.
see, Phil, you
Yeah,
can't do that. Don't do
tell it to the
that,
My
Phil.
police.
Don't do that, Phil. You
Thank
just
Tell it to
sat
the
here and
police.
made a very you stood very hard behind the point that white officers were being discriminated. But now that Kevin has presented
I didn't
you,
stigmatize every
but now that
black
Kevin has
person. I
presented
didn't.
you with your blind spot, it's now a race doesn't even matter that much. It's not that big of a deal. It's a very much big deal, especially in a city like Cincinnati, because the same way that you can sit up and you can point out how you saw, what you believe or perceive to be discrimination, or favoritism for black officers, we can sit here and what we start this podcast at one something. We can sit here until 2 o'clock tomorrow and give you example after example of favoritism being given to white law enforcement in the city of Cincinnati. We don't have to even look nowhere else in the country. We can stay right here in Cincinnati and give you example after example. Race is always prominent. And this is the reality that black people live in. And that's why we have these conversations with you, Phil. And you be feeling like you're getting attacked, but we really just be trying to give it to you real. We don't have the luxury. We don't
No, it's
have the
okay.
luxury of not thinking in terms of race, because it literally does affect everything. And we can't afford to live with the kind of blind spots that you sometimes present when we have these conversations. We can't afford to live like that. Unfortunately, this and it just is what it is at this point. And so we make it look easy because we don't have any other choice. But this is the reality that we live with, Phil. We cannot afford to just give these white officers the benefit of the doubt that this is not fueled by some as Nate said, some desire to lean into what's happening right now with this current administration, which is I don't see enough white faces in power and it makes me uncomfortable. I'm gonna do something about it.
Yeah,
It's
and
very
see,
easy to come to that conclusion because that is the reality that a lot of minorities live under. If there are not enough white faces in power, white people get nervous. That is a reality, Phil. And so when we have these conversations and we venture off into, well, I would prefer that things be done based off of merit. You can't say that. You can't say that because it wasn't merit that made you uncomfortable with not seeing enough white faces. It was because of entitlement. It wasn't merit. It was entitlement.
and I would say that this city benefits from having a good relationship with the police department. This city benefits when we have a police department that has and reflects our neighborhood. So the efforts to diversify the command staff and the lieutenants is a virtuous effort that benefits all of us. And what you got to remember is that two things can be true at the same time. The city may have a program where they're not going to overlook female and black candidates. We're going to make sure we take a good look at you guys. But that doesn't mean that because a white officer doesn't get an assignment, that doesn't mean that it's not because that particular white officer just doesn't meet whatever standard. It has nothing to do with the program whatsoever that they're running in terms of diversity. And that's the little gap that we don't talk about enough. Just because you're a white officer and you've got a DEI program and you don't get it, don't mean that you necessarily had anything to do with with the fact that you just aren't ready. Maybe you just got beat out. That can happen as well. But in Trump's world, white men never get beat out because
Yeah.
they're the
Well,
hardest workers. It's
but
got to
that's
be
but
DEI, right?
yeah, that's been the mantra of white supremacy in this country since its inception. That white is right, white is better, the ice is colder. That is what not just has been preached to black people, it's been embedded in the minds of white folks. And I can tell you this because
The schools are better.
some friends who I've talked to who've been honest enough to be real with me on some of these things is and many people won't admit to it is that oftentimes when a black face shows up in your workplace, the initial thought process is was an exception made so that you could have the job, right? Not immediately that you are as skilled as they are or that you have a higher level of competence. Heaven forbid that. But it's always there must have been some exception or favor that made for you to be here. And who was the white person that got passed over so that you could be here? I'm not saying that that is the prevailing thought among every white person, but many have that attitude when they see black faces show up. And
Yeah.
that's primarily because the thing that has been taught in this country is that we are inferior, that minorities are inferior, women
Yeah.
are inferior to white men. That has been the message. And so a white man of a certain mindset will never accept that a woman or a minority is better than him at anything, even if it's clearly that they are.
Until he step onto that basketball court, on that football court, he gonna know exactly who on top. That's a joke. But y'all missed all of that. It was actually a
No,
really good game.
it did.
It actually
I
was really
got you,
good.
Nathan.
Okay, yeah, it was really good. But it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Tough crowd. Raven is looking like I don't know what this man's talking about. Raven, you still with us?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
she's still with us. All right. She got better things going on. She's like, well, I don't know what y'all talking about. I'll jump back in later. But you know, listen, this is bigger than race on some levels. It really is because you got a lot of mediocre people out there that think that they're exceptional, right? You got a lot of people that think that they are a whole lot more than what they really are, and that could be the case in this case right here. You could just have they happen to be white officers, and they mediocre as AF, but they think they more than what they really are, and they getting passed over. So it must be race. Cry me a river. Why? If you look at any statistical category that's good, like all the good categories, like where you want to be at the top, it's nothing but white men. Nothing but white men. But now they want to cry and moan and complain that we just can't pillage the way we used to. I mean, please stop it. And we got to stand our ground in this fight against what we know is right to the very end, no matter what it costs, because our future is at stake, and that's worth everything. So, I don't have a problem with the city having these policies, and I hope the city fights to the very bitter end. If these officers, if this is a frivolous lawsuit, this is not going to happen. But to me, that tells me we got some bad people on the force, and they're sitting around thinking about the wrong things, right? And we're paying for it. You're sitting around talking about how I got passed over. Please, just be a better officer. Be better at your job. Maybe you're just mediocre and you think you're better than what you really are. So I'm gonna move on.
Yeah, what Nathan, just one last thing before we close this out. Here's what I would like to see is I would like to see our workplaces and public government entities come up with better ways to remove barriers, not just for black people and women or other, but for everybody. How about this? How about if we create, unbiased systems that set everybody up for success to be the best person that they could possibly be or the best employee that they could possibly be, and then let the chips fall where they may, because I think that's what everybody wants. Look, as a black man, I don't want anybody to hand me jack. I don't need anybody to hand me jack. What I do need for people to do is to make sure that there are not obstacles or things that are set up in my path that keep me from showing my excellence and exhibiting my excellence. That's all black people have ever needed. They want to put this message out here that black people or even sometimes women are in need of special favors. We're not in need of special favors. What we're in need of is for the haters and the blockers to get the hell out of our way and let us show how good that we can be without people intentionally trying to trip us up. That's what the argument is, because I think black people and women and to and other groups have shown that if you take away the barriers, if you put us on an equal playing field with equal rules and equal consideration, you don't have to worry about it. We'll rise to the top of the equation. So don't hold us down. Like, how about working on policies and practices and things that do that eliminate barriers and things that hold people back, and then we'll see how things
Yeah.
shake out.
It's called DEI, Kevin. We've been doing it, and we're
Yeah,
watching this
hey,
Trump
look,
administration dismantle it all.
I'm a proponent of DEI. We've had many
Yeah,
conversations on this program that's exactly what DEI was designed to
yeah.
do. That's what folks on the other side, people like these cops who want to argue discrimination, are saying what DEI is, which it wasn't. Like, DEI is all about saying, hey, clear the runway for me and I can take off by myself. But if you're gonna litter the runway with all kinds of bogus BS and stuff intentionally meant to hold me back or to keep me from taking flight, that is what we're fighting against.
Black people, when black people have a case in which they're trying to like prove discrimination, they gotta bring all the evidence in the world and jump through these hurdles and all of these legal justifications and preferences. But it just seems like Trump can just say, or white folk can just say, hey, just because they got this preference. I mean, where is the data to show that white men are somehow uh under attack, or their quality of life? I just don't believe it. I don't believe it one bit. But let's move on. Another local story. City leaders now have unveiled part of their summer violence plans in terms of combating youth violence, and they unveiled another year's worth of a commitment for the youth program. As you can read there, they're actually going to expand it, Phil. They're expanding the youth program. And
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. They're expanding it
no,
to
I'm
me.
just
Is
I'm
that
just
what
letting you
you
know that
said?
the city.
Okay, no, you said they're expanding it. I thought to Phil, and I just
Nah, I
wanted some
just was to
clarification.
underscore you because I know that you don't believe in these programs.
But thank you. I'd love the opportunity. I need a little more recreation in my life,
Yeah,
so that's
absolutely. You're
fine. No
more
problem.
than welcome to go. They might even need some volunteers, Phil. You can volunteer with these sweet babies and, and make sure they stay out of
Nathan,
trouble.
maybe you and I could do. Maybe Nathan, maybe you and I could kind of be
Hey,
counselors for
been
the
there, done
summer.
that.
Two of
That's a
us.
hard job. Been there, done
Okay,
that.
all right.
but it's
All
called
right.
the Summer in Cincy Initiative. It's returning for its third year to combat juvenile violence. And basically, they're going to put resources and really put a focus on the neighborhoods that statistically are dealing with some of the biggest problems when it comes to crime. And I think it's a great idea. I think,
I'm
yeah,
surprised, Nathan. You support
absolutely.
this? I am
Absolutely.
shocked.
So wait a
I
minute, Phil.
am
Are you telling
shocked.
me? Wait,
This
hold
is
on,
so out
Phil.
of character.
Hey,
I
don't
am
hold on,
totally
Phil. Are you
shocked.
telling me that you don't support the efforts to prevent violence and crime?
Oh, I'm 100% for supporting efforts to prevent
Okay,
crime
then
that
you
work.
support this then. And I think this is a great
No,
example.
it may be a good thing, but I don't think that's the way you prevent. That's a crime. That's going to cut down youth
Absolutely.
violence. I'm sure it's a nice thing. That's a nice thing to have activities. I'm not saying it isn't, but do I think that's the way you? That's going to cut down on violent crime. Well, let's wait and see.
Oh, it
I'll bet
absolutely
it
is. I can
doesn't.
tell you're being
Let's
cynical.
let's compare at the end of the summer. We'll compare the crime rate,
Well, we can
violent
compare
crime
it
among
already.
youth
That's
or among whatever
we can already
to last
compare it.
summer.
Violent crime is down across the city, and that's the truth.
Not juvenile
Well,
crime.
and
This is what
again,
this is
listen,
about.
and that just makes my point.
Juvenile crime is
It is
way up.
not
That's why
way
they're
up.
supposed.
It
That's
it,
why they're
it
doing
has
this.
spiked, but I wouldn't say it's way up. But listen, let's say you're right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have said
Okay,
spike.
listen, I should have
My
said
part.
way
It
up. Let's say you're
spiked.
right. It's way up. That just tells me that the city is even more right to make sure we put our resources with our youth because
Okay,
because
what happens at the
statistically
end of
we
the
can see
summer
that
if
they
crime
need
goes
it,
up
Phil.
even? What if it goes up even more? Are you gonna? If it goes up even more at the end of the summer, are you gonna say, "Oh, well, that was a bad
No.
idea. It didn't work"?
No, you know
Are
what
you
I'll
gonna
do?
admit
I'll
that?
do what the people in
No.
these programs always do, Phil, is they're gonna sit back, assess it, see what worked, see what didn't work, and it might need more love, as in tax dollars. It might need more focus and attention. But
Here,
I think you need multiple tools in your toolbox when you're dealing with what we're dealing with right now in terms of youth violence, crime in general. It's not going to just be one thing. The idea is that you could just lock them up and scare everybody because we're so crazy tough on crime. That has proven to not work. So we're trying something different, Phil, and I applaud the city.
Yeah, here's what I would say. I kind of agree with Phil slightly, and I agree with Nathan. Here's what I would say. This is a good thing for the city to do, period, regardless of the impact on violent crime. Look, the bottom line is kids in Cincinnati need more things to do. They need more opportunities to have places and spaces where they can go to have a good time. And we know that idle hands or the devil's workshop. So if at a minimum, even if this does not reduce violent crime, it'll at least keep some kids, I think, who might find themselves in bad situations or in the wrong place at the wrong time, from finding themselves in those situations. I was kind of like Phil. I kind of questioned, like, okay, hey, where's the data? Where's the evidence that suggests this type of thing actually has a direct correlation on violent crime? Because part of me thought, like, are the kids who are really out there with the guns and who are committing some of these violent crimes and shootings and things that we're talking about, are they really the type of kids that are going to take advantage of these opportunities anyway? I'm
Yes.
skeptical. I'm skeptical on that. I don't know. It would be helpful if the city has some kind of data or people could provide some kind of data that says yes. So, like, I know there's a program called Saturday Hoops program where they do in different neighborhoods every year where they do basketball, or every weekend they do basketball in the mornings, I think over several months. It's a successful program. I've heard stories about, kids who've come in there with guns and who've turned in the guns. And so there is anecdotal evidence or stories that are told by people who are involved in some programs and programs like these, of the impact that it has on some kids who might have been at risk or had some violent tendencies. So I'm not saying that it doesn't have any effect or zero effect, because there are a lot of stories and things that you don't hear about, data that you won't be able to collect. So that's why I said, like, on its face, I think it's a good idea regardless. But I think it does help if you are going to make the claim that, like, hey, this is going to drive down violent crime. that you need to provide some data to support that. I don't think you need that because I think it's a good program in general. I think the city would just be well enough to say, this is good for us to have more alternatives for our kids rather than tying the money to violent crime to where if violent crime doesn't go down, then you got people like Phil who are saying this is a waste of money. You don't need to tie this to violent crime. It's just something good to do for our kids, period.
I think that I have to agree with Kevin. Programs like this, they cover a myriad of issues. So to just to only tie it to, the issue that we're seeing with youth and violence, there are a bunch of different organizations trying to attack this problem. So I think that to take something like this and kind of pigeonhole it to that one purpose, I don't think it's very effective. I think that what they're attempting to do in general is a great effort to make. I think that in general, and it's also, and again, I love you, Phil, but I also think that your view is just a tad bit classist.
As long as you love me,
I gotta
that's
say
all
your
I
view
care
is just a
about.
tad bit classist because for somebody who makes a certain level of money, who can afford to pay for opportunities for your kids to not be um bored during the summertime and give them curricular activities out of your pocket. I think that this is not something that is ever going to appeal to you because it's not something that you've ever had to consider. You've never had
I don't
to.
think we're disagreeing. I didn't say if the purpose is multi-purpose, multifaceted. I don't have a problem with that. I was just talking because it was presented as a solution for this one thing, violent crime. But I don't think you and I are
Okay,
disagreeing that if it meets a lot of objectives, I don't have a
okay,
problem.
then that's good. But I
It's just
think
so
that
cynical. It's just so
but
cynical. Go
but
ahead.
but I will say that for somebody, like I said, for somebody who ain't worried about what their kid is gonna be doing in the summertime because they can afford to pay for all the extracurricular activities that their kid can take part in to keep them off the street, this is not something that's ever gonna matter to them. They're never going to see the benefit in it.
Well,
But for somebody,
my kids are
well,
19 and
well, but
22.
I'm saying for somebody
My kids are.
who's never had to
No, what I'm saying is,
utilize
if I have to
for
worry
somebody
about
who's
them
never
at
had
their
to utilize a city program to make sure their kid is not on the streets or has something to do to occupy themselves during the summer, this is never going to be as much of a benefit to that person as for somebody who is desperate for to do something with their child over the summer. I don't have the money to send my kid off to summer camp or to send my kid off to basketball camp or whatever these various different outlets could be for my youth. I don't have the money to do that. Something like this is perfect for that person. And that's something that we should all care about. If we do care about things like the violence that we see our youth partaking in the summertime, as well as some of the other issues that come with youth being idle in the summertime. It ain't just violence, it's a myriad of different things. It's making sure these kids have a stable somewhere stable to get a meal from. A lot of these kids only eat when they go to school during the school year. It's to help these kids with levels of things that come with poverty. These are all issues that come out from a place of poverty of not having proper resources. So if you frame it that way, it's amazing. It's something we all should care about and support and be willing to put our tax dollars behind. But I do think that you kind of when you like I said, when you pigeonhole it to only be the solution to youth violence in the summertime, you do end up with people who can make the argument that it's a waste of money, that's a waste of tax dollars. And also you run the risk of creating a situation where these are things we only pay attention to during the summertime. Youth violence happens year round. I know that it ramps up sometimes in the summertime, but I think that it can be something that doesn't just exist in the summertime. This is something that we should be looking at all year round. And there are multiple organizations who are looking at youth violence all year round. These kids are having to experience very violent acts and very violent things and be in that type of environment all year round. And I would even argue that some of this stuff ramps up during the school year because they're with each other more often during the school year. So I have to agree with Kevin. I think that if you pigeonhole it to just addressing that one issue, you do run the risk of creating the kind of people who don't see the benefit in it.
See, the problem with Cincinnati is the same problem, probably all over the world, is that we got messed up priorities. So, you know, here we are, you got county, they're asking the state for hundreds of millions of dollars so that we can have a world class football stadium. We got all this money invested in people who are already rich. But when it comes to poor kids, because that's what we're talking about, poor kids, we're cynical. We need to see data. We need to do this. We need to do that. Even though we already know what it really is, but that's how it happens. When you're dealing with people who are underprivileged, they're always overlooked. They're always over focused on, over scrutinized, overstudied. It's the same damn thing. So what we should be doing in Cincinnati is investing in world class rec centers. We should have a world class rec centers. We should have world class opportunities for our children in terms of our engagement, because it all goes back to all good things. I want kids to graduate and go on and do great things. I don't want them to get into the system. And like Raven said, poor kids don't have the same resources. So yeah, we the taxpayers, we're all invested. We all benefit when if all the children born in Cincinnati in impoverished conditions grow up to do great things and not go into the criminal justice system. If they all go on to be productive citizens and pay taxes, we all benefit. So I don't know why we talk it, but we don't really invest in it. So I have no problem with it. I was reading through it. They're going to be doing a lot of fun stuff. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of kids who are going to go. And I hope they have a great time. I hope they have a world class experience right when they're there, because they deserve it.
Yeah.
We got a lot of wealth in this city. It's time for the wealthy to try to start spending some more love and making sure everybody's living well, if we really
Hey,
care about children. So I have no problem with it. This is what a city should be doing. They should
yeah.
be invested in our youth. We should be in after school programs, and that's what we should be doing, because studies show that after school is when a lot of kids get in trouble. I'd much rather them be in an after school program doing whatever, or maybe extracurricular sports or whatever. I'd much rather them doing that. But cost and transportation is still a thing for a lot of families, and it shouldn't be that way. I mean,
Yeah.
we all sit around celebrating, and I'm happy for Jamar Chase. I'm happy for T. Higgins, but we all celebrating these guys making hundreds of millions of dollars. Meanwhile, you got all these, impoverished people just trying to get by. It's just messed up. It's a value
But
system.
but here's what I think you got to realize about the Jamar Chase and the T Higgins, and I don't know like their family backgrounds or upbringings, but even throwing them out, there are a lot of kids who play in the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball who are there because in their neighborhoods and in their communities they had programs, they had little league football, baseball, opportunities where they could go and begin to develop their skills and introduce them to the sports and get them off the streets. So you're 100% on the mark, Nathan. Is that I think it was Classy One was like, hey, this money could be better spent someplace else. But I'm like, the greatest investment that any city can make is in its kids, because they are the future. And so I think, unfortunately, too often, and to your point, kids are the area where we want to make cutbacks, whether that's in education or whether that's in programs like these. And like you said, Nathan, give that money to people who actually don't need it. I've always made the argument that you're either going to pay for our kids now or you're going to pay for them later. And what I mean is you're going to pay for them later in terms of the cost of building more jails and incarcerating them, the cost of hiring and paying more police to deal with the crime that you think is a problem, the cost to pay with the crimes that people are victims of. So you're going to pay now or pay later. It's just a matter of how you want to pay. And my argument has been, hey, let's pay on the front end to try to develop our kids into productive citizens that can be a credit to our communities versus a drain on our communities. And it starts with this type of investment in doing these types of things. Now I will say again, and this just goes back to the accountability, the checking, and making sure that one, we're netting as many kids as we possibly can through these programs. And this comes into vetting the process and making sure that they're being effective. So if we're going to spend this money, we need to make sure that we're capturing as many kids as we can and making sure that they're taking advantage of it. I'm not saying that that's not the case, but I'm saying that we need to make sure that these things are being advertised, that we're getting it in the schools, that if there are transportation concerns that kids have that are keeping them from taking advantage, like all of these things, we need to make sure that those things are addressed so that we can maximize the impact of these programs and capture as many kids as we possibly can. But you hit the nail on the head, Nathan. There is no greater investment that we should be making than in our young people.
Appreciate it. Let's move on. Texas,
Can I add
absolutely.
one
Go
thing to
ahead.
that? Do you mind? My grandfather, who I was named after, was very prominent in social work. He was kind of a pioneer in New York, and he used to work with prisoners. Like he'd go into Sing Sing prison, all these prisons, and kind of help them maintain their families. And when they got out, help them get jobs and stuff. And he founded a organization in New York City called the Youth Council Bureau, which basically I think was one of the first that advocated for actually treating juveniles different from adults, which they didn't always do. And he said something to me one time about punishment, and he said punishment needs to be quick and sure. And in other words, it doesn't have to be a long, harsh sentence, but it has to have some impact. And I'll just give you an observation. When I was a prosecutor in juvenile court, I was there for about a year or so. One of the things that I observed that really bugged me was you would have a kid who would commit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 crimes, maybe not the most serious, maybe theft, assault, and stuff like that. And they put him on probation over and over and over. Never really, there was no punishment, okay? Because they looked at it as, oh, we got to help him or this and that. And then that kid, seeing that he really wasn't held accountable, would go out and commit a serious crime, and then they bind him over and send him away for 10 years. And I always felt, using that philosophy that my grandfather had said, that if they would take a kid who steals or does something like that, not a serious crime, and put him in 2020 for 3 days, even a week, just enough so they get immediate punishment because they don't want to go to 2020. But it's sending him there for 5 days to a week or whatever it is, something I think would have a huge impact on kids because they wouldn't get the sense I can get away with things. And it would prevent them from then going out and committing more
Yeah,
serious crimes. So that's
I
just
hate that
an
idea.
observation.
Hate it. It's the exact opposite of what it should be, man. I mean, we should be showing leniency. You don't want to throw these kids to the wolves in 2020. You don't know what they might. Three
I'm talking
days.
about
That's a
three
light
days,
three.
4 days.
We
Come
act
on.
like throwing somebody 3
But
days in
that's the
2020 is
but
no big deal. That is harsh, bro. You don't want to go to 2020
Well,
for
the
three
message
days.
here, if you don't punish them at all,
Probation
and
is
I saw this
punishment,
over and
Phil.
over.
That's
thank you.
punishment.
Here's the
No, it's
problem,
no, it's not.
Phil.
That's
Here's the
a
No,
problem.
it's
personal
Look, and
not.
opinion.
I've told this story a million times. When I was little, I stole from a store. My mom called me. She marched me to the manager's office, embarrassed me. The manager said, "Hey, I'm not going to prosecute. I don't believe in prosecuting kids. Lesson learned. I didn't steal anything again from that. I didn't need 3 days in 2020. Wait a minute,
Yeah,
let
but
me finish.
most
Let me
parents
let me
aren't going to
finish.
do what
I
your
didn't need
parents
three
did.
days in 2020 or wherever to help me learn my lesson from that one instance. And I don't think a lot of kids do. The difference is kids need to have bodies on them. And what I mean by that is you need to have some structure and some other people around you that help you sort of keep your priorities and keep your head on straight. A lot of these
What
kids
if you
don't
don't,
have
though?
that.
What if you
So
So we
don't?
what
just
we
throw
need to
that kid to the
so
wolves. That's the kid
so
who needs
what
it
we
the
need to
most.
yeah, so what we need to do is build a better system of mentorship and things of that nature around kids so that when they go to court and they do get on probation, that you're not just turning them loose into the streets without any sort of follow-up or without any support systems around them, especially if you know they don't have strong support at home and in the families. And there are a lot of different ways that you can get to that point. Nathan brought up corporate Cincinnati kicking in more. And here's what I'll say. I'm not saying corporate Cincinnati is perfect, but I've been involved in a lot of programs and seen a lot of things where there's some aspects of corporate Cincinnati that really do step up and support some of these programs, not just with money, but with employees who show up to different things. Now, could there be more of that? Absolutely. And we definitely need to tap into that. But we have a reservoir of resources. I've always said that if you could take everybody in Cincinnati, right, and they would just agree to mentor one kid, just take on one kid for a few hours a week, that you could change the dynamics of this city almost literally overnight if people would just take a moment of their time to spend some time investing in our kids, to mentor kids, and to keep them and to stay on top of them and help them stay on the straight and narrow, that could turn this city around. And it doesn't take a whole lot of time to be a mentor and to take a kid under your wing and kind of help them out. That simple thing in and of itself, which is just asking people to volunteer of themselves, could have a transformative effect on our city.
I just think it's interesting that when we approach any other issue that we're having in the city, the first thing we think of is how to throw money at it. But when it comes to these kids, we are so tight with the purse strings. We are so hesitant. We are so like impatient even with how we decide to strategize on how to address some of these issues that we see with our youth. It's just disheartening. It's very disheartening, and it's like I just I feel like it's easy to make some of these very harsh judgments about these kids until it's your kid. And I think that a lot of us would love to believe that we've raised kids, and you might even be telling the truth. But a lot of us believe that we've raised our children to not be these kinds of kids who would even have to come into contact with these kinds of systems, and so it allows us a lack of empathy when we're thinking about how we're dealing with children who don't have the luxury of being your child. I think that it's I don't know. It's just these conversations always seem to come with a lack of empathy for a child who does not have the same. Um,
Yeah, can I share something I have empathy about? When I was in the prosecutor's office, I didn't voice this because it wouldn't do any good, but I felt that there were just sentences were just too long. Okay, too long. And and when we're talking about empathy, I had empathy when there was a kid who got convicted of a crime at age 15 or 16, and my office always wanted it whenever they could to quote bind them over, which means treat them as an adult, which means going to an adult prison for a couple of years, which in my opinion is, unless the kid has a long history of violence, I think is very destructive and unfair and unjust. Just so you're clear, I had tremendous empathy when I saw some kid that age going away to an adult prison for years. And that is part of the reason why, and I'm all for the mentoring and all, but that's part of the reason why I believe it is actually compassionate. If kids, when they commit one or two crimes, maybe they're not murdering anybody, if they get some punishment,
Probation is
they
punishment, Phil.
some punishment, excuse me, let me
It
finish. It
is.
is not. I know and look, I knew every probation officer there, and they would tell you just the opposite. But the fact is, what I'm trying to say is, when I say
What?
give these kids a couple days at 2020, it's not a lack of empathy because I know I've seen too many cases where they get older and then they commit something really serious, and then
It's a lack
their
of
lives
empathy
destroyed.
and the belief that these children, and we talk about primarily black and brown children, is getting caught up in the system. So let's be clear about who we talking about. That they just need. That we just got to be.
Well,
We
there
just
was
got
a
to.
lot of white kids. I
Okay,
felt
okay.
sorry for
Well,
both.
we just got to be tough on them. No. Like, no, we don't
No,
have to
I
be
don't want.
tough on the black
I
kids or
want to
the
be
kids.
compassionate. If you let a kid get away with something over and over, that is not being
And
compassionate.
sometimes it's
That's being
called love. We let our
foolish.
own kids. I think about my own children. I let my kids get away with stuff all the time, but then I come down on them sometimes. I mean, sometimes they do stuff, and I do something that's tantamount to probation. I might take my son's tablet for a day or something like that. Then he gets it back. He gets the message.
But that's not
And
probation. That's
probation,
exactly the right thing. That's
probation is it's the
punishment.
same thing. It's probation. It's a slap on the wrist. It's a hey,
It's not
yeah,
the
you
same
people act like
thing.
probation is no big
It's
deal. It's
not.
not. Probation is a major pain in the you know what. Nobody wants to be on papers. Everybody knows that. You gotta keep your nose clean and adhere to all
On
these rules
paper,
and then show up and keep talking to these people. Nobody wants to do that. You just dismissing it like it's no big deal. And if you're dealing with a juvenile,
it
if you're
isn't a
dealing
big
with a
deal to
juvenile,
those
that means there's
kids.
parents is involved. So it's parents got to take them. Parents hate that kind of stuff.
Not always. A lot of times they don't even. Some of them don't even care.
Maybe, Maybe. I'm just saying, as a general
But we're
rule,
also
It-
completely
Pat,
I'm
neglecting the
having
kids who do respond to probation. There are
Yes,
no, there are kids out there who respond to probation, who
absolutely.
hate it so much that they don't want to do whatever they just did to get probation. So when you take that away as an option, you are now giving this child a
you
criminal
penalizing
no.
them.
I
record,
think
a
they should be put on
juvenile
probation.
record,
That's I
when
just think there ought to
probation
be a
would
little
have been
punishment.
enough, and that is not fair.
Yeah, Raven, that's a great point. Raven, you raise a great point that what often doesn't get talked about is the many more kids who go through the process who learn their lesson
Absolutely.
and you never hear about them again. What but that doesn't catch newspaper headlines, that doesn't get talked about on podcasts like this or others. It's the more extreme cases that make the news and headlines that we talk about, and we begin to convince ourselves that that is representative of what the majority of cases are. I mean, here's what I would say to Phil's point. If this is your first offense, one, it depends on what you did as to whether or not I would say you needed to be punished that harshly. If you did something serious, then yeah, maybe you need to spend 2 or 3 days in that. But if you did what would be considered a minor misdemeanor crime, again, like stealing something or something like that, I think probation is certainly appropriate. I also think the amount of times that you've appeared before the court should also matter. If it's your first time, absolutely not. I'm not for for a lesser crime, locking up a kid for 2 or 3 days. I think that is overly harsh. I think if
Yeah.
this is like if I think if this is like your third or fourth offense, then yeah, maybe you need to be looking at stuff. So I think you need to take a look at it on a case by case basis. You need to look at the kid himself, the support that they have around it. I think like that's the problem that we get into with some of these policies and laws is a lot of times we try to defend against the worst who are a small percentage, and as a result of that the majority wind up paying harsher prices when the majority are the ones who would learn. So we're always trying to solve for the worst of the worst, which are the lowest percentage, and there are a whole lot of people who get caught up in that. And I just think that that's been the wrong-headed thinking of politicians for so long. And Phil, you're from that old guard who who believes in that hard and charging punishment. And I think what people are asking for is a smarter way of dealing with things.
I just said I don't. I oppose the sentence. That my belief was that, and it still is, that sentences are way too long. So
No,
don't
no, no,
throw
no.
me
But
in that category.
you're still busting them upside the head with the punishment. I get you're saying, hey, there's a.
Busting them
Hey,
upside the
look,
It's a
head.
figure of
when you
speech,
say
Phil.
throw a kid in jail for 2 or 3 days on a first offense, that's extreme, Phil. You might
That's
not think
it's
so.
Fine, make it the second, or make it the second. I don't care. It's not. That's not the
but
point.
see, but their freedom shouldn't be just thrown away around so cavalierly. You're like, just make it the
I'm
second,
saying you're
make it the
doing a
third. You're
favor.
talking
If
about
a
somebody's
kid
freedom.
commits a bunch of minor offenses, you're doing him a favor by giving him some level, however
I
small,
don't believe
of
that.
punishment to save him from going to
I don't
prison
believe
later
that.
for 10
I don't
years.
believe that one bit. No wonder our system is so messed up because we let you Republicans be in charge too much with that kind of mentality. Almost every idea you come up, Phil, it has the same thing. Like it's like it's gonna hurt a whole lot more people than it helps. But you're focusing on a small little tiny amount of people that it might help, even if they're microscopically small. So no, Phil, we're not going to throw kids in jail on first time offenses for 3 days, and then you want the taxpayers to pay for that? You're a Republican. What about lower taxes? Where is the consistency, man?
Hey, pal, if something actually reduces crime, which I think what I'm suggesting does, I don't mind paying for it. And in fact, even any Republican, and there are a few who actually live up to what we say we believe, would say that the two major functions of government are law enforcement and military, protecting the country inside and outside. So, what I'm saying you may not agree with, but I don't think it's inconsistent with the
Oh,
so-called
it's not.
Republican
That's what I'm saying. It's
philosophy.
not. You guys are always coming up with these crazy ideas that help nobody.
Well,
Uh,
Nathan, look, here's what I'll say about the Republicans, and this is typical of them. They'll want to send you to jail until you're somebody like a political contributor or something like that. And then they love to regulate laws that put people in jail, but they don't want to put regulations on businesses who do all sorts of things and put the public health and everything else at risk. No, that's free market. We ought to let that go. But on these kids, let's throw them in jail for 2 or 3 days. Meanwhile, a company that's poisoning your drinking water, they shouldn't face any kind of regulations at all. You gotta love that Republican line of logic.
Yeah, I think he's on point with that. Rachel writes, I went to 2020 for a 3-day stay. It did not do ish. She said, I was hard-headed when I went in. I was even more hard-headed when I came out. I know people that went in there and came out worse, Bill.
Maybe she should have been. Maybe she should have had a month
Man,
there. Maybe
listen,
that was the
there are
problem.
people, you don't want to do that. I know people that went to 2020 and came out worse.
No
They
offense
came
to
out
Rachel, I
much
don't know her.
worse. Because some people go to
I would
situations
say
like
that
that they learn how to become better criminals.
2020, by the way, is much different from a adult prison. They have a lot of sort of social work concerned about the family. So it's not like
well,
sending him to
Here's a novel idea.
well, but here, but
Here's a
here's one
novel
of the
idea,
things.
Phil.
Here's where
How
I
about
would push
this?
back on. Here's where I would
Hold
push
on,
back
real
on
quick.
that.
Hold on 1 second, real Kevin.
Yeah.
How about here's a novel idea? How about instead of spending all that money on the back end, as Kevin was talking about, in terms of all the money to upkeep a prison, let's put it on the front end in terms of trying to uplift and inspire these young people and invest in these young people like they're doing here in the city of Cincinnati before they ever get in trouble. Why don't we invest in kids with their upward trajectory? We just seem so much more comfortable being invested when they make mistakes and they have a downward trajectory. That's all I'm saying. It's just a different way of thinking about it. I want to invest in the best.
But if you open that door, Nate, if you open that door to addressing a problem before it becomes a problem, then you have to actually address the root of these issues, which is classism, which is racism, which is all of these bigger things that most Republicans have no interest in actually doing anything about. So I mean, that's why we always arrive to these particular kinds of conversations where we're trying to deal with an issue after the fact. We some of us propose maybe we should deal with this before it becomes a problem, and then the response to that, which is typically Republican, is I don't really feel like spending the money to do that. So how about we just deal with it
Yeah.
after the fact because it's
Yeah.
cheaper to do it that way.
Well, and
Well, there's no sympathy.
there's more currency politically to deal with it that way as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
Sure, because the prevailing attitude among a lot of people is if you are poor or you wind up in jail or you're in this type of situation, it's your own fault. Like there's not a lot of sympathy, particularly for adults, because what people will say is they won't criticize the kid because you just have to be a jerk to do that. What they'll say is well, their parents need to do this, that, or the more. If they had better parents, and so it always shifts to the adults, and adults have an issue with helping other adults that they feel like should have more personal responsibility and should have done a better job of managing or living their life. So I'm not going to help you. I don't feel like I should have to spend my dollars to help you. Nobody help me. And that's kind of a prevailing attitude. It's why Jesus said in the Bible, the poor are always going to be with you, because he understood the prevailing selfishness and general lack of compassion that's inherent in most people who feel like, hey, nobody helped me, which isn't true, or I made it on myself. You should be able to make it too. And so there's not a lot of sympathy out there from adult to adult, and kids wind up suffering. Now, the one thing I would push back on Phil is he wants to say that 2020 isn't like a
Only one
yeah, it
thing you're
isn't like a
pushing back on
hardcore
me?
prison or something like that. And while I would agree with that in general, there are still some things that happen to kids inside of 2020 at the expense of other kids that are in there that can be traumatizing. I know this because I spend time mentoring and talking to a lot of kids in dropout recovery centers who have been in juvenile detention centers like that. And they're not all, wine, roses, and candy as some places would
Nor
have you
should they
believe.
be.
And there's some traumatic and negative experiences that some kids have in there that taint them for when they come out, for when they come out of there. So it's no small thing, even when you're talking about 2020 or some kind of juvenile detention center, that's some small thing for any kid.
Point I was making, that is not a small thing to say. You're gonna spend a day or 2 or 3 days in juvie. You might come out somebody different or not come out at all. That's all I got, guys. We're coming up on that 3 hour mark, so I know you got to really respect your time. So we'll just end it with this and just kind of circle back. Is there anything that you want to circle back to? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Get it off
I'm
your
gonna
chest.
cheat. I'm gonna cheat, Nathan. You gonna get hey, and I'm gonna take liberty, as your partner in this show to extend to extend to one more thing, because and my closing comment is gonna lead into it. We don't.
Kevin, a lot of us have places to go, things to do,
Hey,
people to see. Come on.
five minutes. This I'm sure this is all it takes because it's pretty self-explanatory.
I got my stopwatch
But
out
I
here,
wanted to
pal.
give a
Go ahead.
shout out to my goddaughter, Amina James, who graduated from eighth grade at St. Francis de Sales last night. I went to her graduation, was super proud of her. She won a couple of scholarships, and it's just kind of hard to believe how quickly she's grown up. I used to be able to hold her in one hand, and now she is a blossoming, beautiful teenager who's got a bright future in front of her. And it was great. The graduation ceremony that they did there was good. Everybody was on their best behavior. People yelled when they were given permission to yell, which we didn't get into the story about the Moeller student who wasn't allowed to walk because apparently he yelled too loudly at a wasn't even his own graduation. It was at
Yeah,
Norwood's graduation, and I just thought that was the most ridiculous thing. I mean, if you want to talk about harsh punishments or over the top punishments, allowing a kid who has spent his entire career to reach his graduation and who's otherwise a good student to not allow that kid to walk because he cheered at a graduation when everybody else was cheering. It wasn't like he was the only one. Like he stood up and
I'm gonna tell
started
you why.
twerking. Like he stood up and started twerking in the middle of the ceremony, drawing it. Like he's among a whole bunch of other people who were cheering at the side. I think that is so petty. Moeller, you are so wrong, so out of line to have denied that young man and his family that opportunity, and you just need to be called out about it. And Norwood need to be called out for narking. I mean, what is that? What is that? That Norwood gonna call up Moeller and narc on a kid? I mean, come on, man. Where is the reason and the rationale? These are adults who are running these schools. I mean, it
Hmm.
ain't like the kid had a gun. It ain't like he got into a fight. It ain't like he was cheering at a graduation. Man, come on, man. We have lost all perspective. Man, I just had to say that, Nathan. I'm sorry.
I
I
hope
think
that
that was
kid.
less than 5 minutes, Phil. I think it was like two.
I hope.
So I'll
I
I'll
hope that
I'll
Can
cede
I
Moeller.
my
do a
time
shout
back
out
to the
since you
group.
did a
No,
shout
no. I'm
out?
glad you brought it up, man. I hope that
Can I do a
Moeller
shout out?
doesn't receive public money because I'm gonna tell you what this is right here. To me, I got this. I got this peg. This is personal. You know, the leadership at Moeller does not like this young man, and or they don't like his family, and it's just that simple. This is just another form of bullying. That's all this is. Because if they like that young man, and or they liked his family, this wouldn't even be an issue. Period. Somebody at Moeller has a personal problem with this young man, and or his father, or maybe his father is vocal and his family went up there and had to let him know a couple times, because those are the kind of people that you do kind of this kind of stuff to. Because we all know in real life this never really had to happen. They chose to do this. When they hit you with the technicalities, that's when they know they don't like you. That's what technicalities are for, to get rid of people you really don't like. But
I'm just sitting here
technically, it's okay. He broke the rule.
I'm just sitting here thinking about like Kevin said, like the game of telephone that had to become possible to make this a thing is just insane to me. Like somebody really had to go out of their way to snitch about something like this. Cause how do you even know who this kid is if he is in a group of people at a graduation at a whole different school? How are you even able to identify who this kid is to even as his school administrator say you was at such and such graduation on such and such day and you was cheering for such and such and because of that you can't walk on your own, like who like did, I have to agree with both Kevin and Nate. This got to be something personal. This got to be something that somebody at that school don't like this boy or his family and decided to target him. Because in no other way does this make any sense at all. Like it just makes no sense.
Yeah, it's sad too, because when we talk about bullying, we rarely talk about the bullying that our children experience at the hands of the people that are supposed to be protecting them. And we rarely talk about the way parents are treated when they come to some of these school situations, because these schools, sometimes they know they got you, right? They know they got you. They know that you want to keep your kid there. Your kid is comfortable. That's just human nature. Like, when people know they think they got something over you, they misuse you. Bad people will misuse you. Good people will treat you right. And that's
And
just the
and
way the
here's
world works.
And here's the ridiculous thing about what Moeller did. And I know this kid, I don't know much about this kid, but I'm betting that his dad or whomever or mom is not boosters or anybody who gives anything significantly to the school. Because if he was someone of notoriety or relative fame or prominence within the Moeller community, this never would have happened to him. And that's the part of this thing that smacks with hypocrisy. If he was somebody else's son who was a bit more prominent in the Moeller community, this would have never happened. But I'm gonna look at this kid, and I'm not gonna make any kind of because I absolutely, I mean, people can look at this kid, they can look at their mom and draw their own conclusions about why Moeller felt comfortable about sticking it to this kid, and they would have never done it to somebody else, maybe a little bit higher up the food chain at the
Mhm.
universe. It wouldn't have happened.
Oh yeah. I mean, not to pick on them. They have nothing to do with this. I don't know them. But let's say his last name was Linder. We're not even talking about this.
No,
Let's say his
absolutely. You
last
don't even
name
hear about it. You
was
don't even hear
Birding
about it.
or whatever. You're not even going to hear about it. There's no way in the world they would even disrespect people of a certain stature by even bringing this up, because they cool with you. And it comes down to relationships. When you got status, people at the school, they treat you a little differently because they want to have a good relationship with you. Like you said, Kevin, if you're a booster, that's the way it is. Money talks. I'm dropping 10, 15,000 up here. Psh, yeah. I'm gonna walk a little different. That's just the way the world works. It is
Yeah.
what it is. Sad for the young man, but if he was a black kid, we say, why don't we tell these people to control themselves? He shouldn't have been making no noise, right? If he was black, that's what we would say. What's wrong with the parents? He should have been listening to rap music. It's just different, but it feels good to kick out of this. I'm gonna keep pushing your buttons, Phil.
Oh, do I have
Yeah,
any doubt about that? Do I have any doubt? All right, do I get to do I wasn't going to do this. Do I get to
I
do a
guess
shout
so.
out since
Yeah,
Kevin got one? You don't
I'm not.
sound real enthusiastic, but I will give a shout out to my beautiful daughter, Allie, who, when I just came back from a mission trip, she went to Kenya for 2 weeks. And from what she tells me, what do you call it? Where she was staying was not a five-star hotel by any means. But she was with this ministry that worked that apparently in Kenya and maybe other places, parents are so poor they will literally leave their kids just out on the street. And this is a ministry that takes the kids, kind of adopts them, gives them education, and teaches them how to earn some money and stuff. And I was just proud of her for taking 2 weeks and living in pretty rough circumstances to do that. So she by God's grace, she just got back safely. So I feel
Good
I
to
feel
hear.
very
Good
grateful.
to hear. I know Daddy likes it when the kids are safe. Daddy likes it. I understand completely.
And one last thing, she had to raise a couple $1,000, and I gave her a list of all of my friends. Well, I mean, most of my friends, and they contributed all of them to help her go. So I felt pretty good about
Good.
that too.
Good. What I would add is I want to circle back to Tamaya Denard again, because she wrote this post, and it to me was clearly sort of responding to, like, putting her thoughts out there about what happened with PG getting a pardon. And as I read this, I was thinking, you know what, sis, man, no, get your pardon, get that off your record, get that off your record. I wouldn't have held it against her, because would it be like some kind of off the kind of, if Tamaya Denard had actively tried to get a pardon, would that have been her trying to sort of game the system, kind of understanding who Donald Trump is, and he might be open into giving pardons to people who've committed crimes such as her? Yeah. But it's the same messed up system that she was born into, and the same messed up system that we're working in now. So I wouldn't have had a problem with her working the system to get a pardon, to get it completely off of her record. So as she moves forward in her life, she ain't got to deal with it. What do you think about that?
Well, Phil can correct me if I'm wrong, but a pardon doesn't absolve the conviction, right? Like the pardon just gets you free, like it doesn't expunge.
No. It does. I think you're talking about clemency. That's the one they just kind of get out of jail, I believe.
Okay, all right. Um, here's what I would say. Here's what I would say.
And by the way, one of those wealthy guys, one of those crooks that white collar crooks that Trump pardoned, he owed $4 million in restitution, which actually, if I recall, came out of his employees' paychecks. And because he had a pardon, as opposed to like clemency, he didn't have to pay any of that money. So those people are out the money, or the
Yeah,
government
here's
is.
what I would say about Tamaya's post, and I wanted to say this at the time, but the conversation went in a different direction. Um, I have respect for her for that, for turning it down. Now, some people might say she was stupid, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if this pardon opportunity came to her during the time that she was serving or whether it was after the fact. But I think there's something to be said for somebody who said, "Hey, I screwed up," which she did. I mean, she took accountability for that. She served her time. She did her time and said, "Hey, I'm not going to take any shortcuts." Um, some people would look at that and say that that's foolish. I think that's actually somewhat admirable. I think that's her saying, "Hey, I'm not on one level. One, I'm not going to take a favor from somebody who I don't have anything in common with politically or who I don't agree with philosophically, right? Even if it is to my advantage. And then to then say, you know what, I'm gonna take my medicine. I'm gonna swallow my medicine because from all accounts, I don't, I haven't kept up with Tamaya and where she's at, but she seems to be doing well for herself and moving past where she's at or where she has been. I don't know what her personal struggle might be at this particular time, but maybe she's in a better place. And it's better to be in a place where you don't owe anything to that dude. If it was me, I wouldn't want to owe Donald Trump anything. I wouldn't want anything associated with him to be on my name. And that's easy for me to say because I wasn't in federal prison. But I give her props for that. I actually
We,
respect the fact that she didn't take it.
I hear that, and I'm not against it. But would you agree when I say that if, let's say, Donald Trump just gave her a pardon, she didn't even try to go for it. On a personal level, that's a good thing for her. Can you agree to that?
Well, sure, it's a good thing if it
Okay.
if it wipes it off the record.
Okay.
It would be a good thing just from that technical standpoint. But
It
here's the
would be a
thing.
good thing.
But here's
Yes.
the thing. Here's the thing. Even if they rub that off the record, look, Tamaya's case has been covered. It's out there on the internet. There's no way that she's going to get around people not knowing about what she did.
It's
So
not about not knowing.
even if Trump extended the pardon, trust me, I'm telling you, because we get people calling every day, well, not every day, that's an over exaggerate, but quite often, trying to address news stories that have been reported about them as it pertains to crimes or things that they've committed or been accused of in the past. That internet is a beast, brother. It don't never go away. I don't care whether your record been expunged or whatever it is. If somebody wants to do the due diligence on you and find
Yeah,
out
but that's
about the
not my
past,
issue though. I
okay.
want my record expunged. I mean, it's off my record. It's like it never happened. I mean, that's a win. That would have been a
But
win
it
for
did. But
Tamaya.
it did happen. She pled. That's what I'm saying.
But it didn't
You want to
happen.
act like the pardon is gonna make it seem like it never happened.
I
But the
want to
fact
act
of the
like if
but the
she's
fact of the
pardoned,
matter is, she admitted guilt. She pled guilty. That's out
it
there.
don't matter. I'm just talking about the legal limitations of the consequences of her sentencing will be off of her record. And that's a good thing. It doesn't matter whether people know or not. You're right. People will know. So what? People know Donald Trump got 34 felonies. He's still the president. So what?
Right. But that's what I'm
So if
saying.
you if
I guess my point is like, what are the benefit of having it off your record? Like, what do you see as the
well, I
benefit?
mean,
Because
one
most people would say like expungements or clearing the records would be good because there would be no trace of it that would stop me from getting jobs or any other things like that that could be an impediment to me. And what I'm saying is that in this digital age, even an expungement, if you've been in the media, if you've been out there on the internet, that ship is sailed, bro. You can't
Yeah.
hide from that.
Listen, all I'm saying, yeah, and she's not hiding from it now. She, as I understand it, she's already employed. So she's been able to sell herself
Right.
even with her record. I'm just saying, get it off your record all the way. Legally, it never happened. And who knows? She might want to run for office. So whatever limitations can be, lifted because she gets a pardon. I understand the whole, and again, whatever she decides, I'm with, either way, because it's her decision. But just for the sake of having the conversation about it, I mean, had she gotten a pardon, that would have been a great thing for her personally.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is corrupt. Yes, he is. But doesn't mean you can't take advantage of his corruption, right? And try to do some good with it. I mean, if you want to look at it as being good, some people will say she deserves what she gets, and I get that. I understand those arguments all the way.
I mean, I think it would be hard to say if you were actually if you were in prison and you were serving that time and that was when the pardon was presented to you and you turned that down. I think that would be hard for a lot of people to walk away from. And if she did that in the midst of serving her sentence, that's an extra tip of the cap to her to have the fortitude to say, I'm not going to do that, because a lot of people would not. A lot of people would have took it to your point and they would have got out like PG Sittenfeld.
Hmm.
But if it's kind of after the fact, maybe it's a little bit easier to say no. But I don't know what the timing of that was.
Hmm. All right, guys, that's all I got. Uh, Not to really start a whole conversation, but Elon Musk is now out of the government allegedly. That's a good thing, right?
I did kind of want to just throw out there that I think it's kind of hilarious how um I was scrolling on Instagram earlier today and I saw an article from the New York Times, basically kind of outlining how the Trump administration very early on in the campaign had concerns, quote unquote, about his drug use and about his family drama and all this other stuff. And it's just hilarious to me that we're hearing this now after they're no longer cool. But during the campaign, he was the greatest thing to ever happen to the American government. He was going to do everything. He was going to save everybody money, and he was going to do all these amazing things. AI was going to change the world, and it was going to give America the head start and the the first position in the race that we always wanted. We were in direct competition with China and all these other countries when it came to AI and technological advancement, and he was going to do that for us. He was going to deliver that. And now that they're not cool no more, that man is a crackhead. That man don't know how to run his family. Like, it's just being somebody who is no longer part necessarily of the media. It's given me a chance to kind of be just a little bit more openly critical about it. And I do say that it annoys me sometimes reading certain things from certain outlets and kind of seeing how things get framed based on who they would rather be appeasing to at the time, in the moment.
That is interesting. I noticed it too. Absolutely. Yeah, Elon was always the scapegoat, but he's also he's no victim. And we don't know what him and Doge were really doing because they certainly weren't saving money. Federal
Mm.
government spent more money than Biden did the same time last year, so they're certainly not saving money. Um, they wrecked a lot of people's lives and probably slowed down the efficiency of a lot of critical federal government agencies that we don't even know yet. Like we'll have to deal with the impact later. And I don't have no respect for the man whatsoever. Now he wants sympathy, please. But I did read a little bit of that article, not all of it, enough of it to see that apparently he had like a little drug box. He had all kind of drugs in there, Adderall, ketamine, all kind of stuff. He popping pills. That's why Elon looks so weird because he's high out of his mind. He's high out of his mind. He probably didn't even know he did the Sig Heal or the High Healer. I'm lying. He knew exactly what he was doing. I'm not letting that man off the hook. I'm just joking.
I'm just sorry, dude. I can't have no sympathy for a billionaire. You got $1 billion. My sympathy meter for you is like in the negative zone, man. Look. You gonna be all
Yeah.
right. Whatever happened, whatever Elon dealing with, he gonna be all right. He got $1 billion.
Oh, absolutely, he's gonna be all right. He's
Long,
dealing with a
long as they
serious
telling
drug
him
addiction.
he ain't got nothing terminal. He ain't got nothing terminal, or he's losing his mental capacities or faculties. He gonna be all right.
You
Bottom
know, I'll
line.
say it again. Elon Musk is a Bond villain, and we should keep our eyes on him. He is not to be trusted, and he's not going anywhere. He's just playing a
Who's
role because it's costing his businesses a lot of money, and he wants to make sure he secures his foundation, which I get. But he is a villain. Do not keep your eyes off of him, and don't
who's the
believe him.
bigger Bond villain, Elon or Trump?
Trump. Trump
I don't
and
know,
Elon.
man. I don't know. Elon might be the bigger Bond villain. You know, he fits the motif. Yeah, I'm not saying Trump in the villain, but I think Elon is because he's like the manipulator behind the scenes type
Yeah.
thing that Trump is out front. He's the guy that you would think is the big villain, but meanwhile you got the real mastermind, behind the scenes, which is Elon Musk, who is got a deeper, more nefarious plan. Trump is a blunt instrument. Elon Musk is more that surgical behind the scenes scalpel cutting us in ways that we ain't even seen yet.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. And Elon, when JD Vance runs in 2028, Elon
Because
he'll
he
be
will run.
yeah, he most certainly. Why wouldn't you? And speaking of JD Vance, I saw that Trump administration Doge cut like what was it, $5-6 million from the education budget for Middletown. So look at this fool. They put up all this signage talking about this is the home of JD Vance. And look at this man, a straight traitor to his own community.
Yeah, so I wrote a little something about that because being from Middletown, I just couldn't resist the opportunity because like 60% of the more than 60% of the town came out and voted for him in the 2024 election, and it's no surprise. And I had a lot of debates with friends and people that I know from Middletown who were 100% in the tank for him, and it's just kind of hard to look at this now and say, okay, dude, this is a school district that you grew up in, a community that you've profited from by, running it down in your book. And now you have an opportunity to step in and intervene and save that district some money that was promised to them. Again, this is money that they were expecting that had been promised to them that was supposed to be coming. You would think that this would be one of those situations where if his love for Middletown is what he would have had you believe on the campaign trail, you would think that this is an easy win, an easy return to favor to my hometown community. And by proxy of that, the 18 other Ohio school districts that are looking to lose money. It's like if JD Vance can't come through for Middletown people on this, then what were your votes for? What were your votes for? What were your
Mhm.
belief in? I don't want to hear from nobody else in that town about how great JD Vance is and what he's going to do for that city if he don't do anything in this instance.
I'm with you. Well, Phil, that's all we got, man. That's all I got. We're jumping off. I appreciate you, Raven. Thank you so much for your time. And Phil, Kevin, thank you so much to the audience. Thank you for being here. We're planning to be back on Friday at 1 p.m. Again, Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please lock us in on Facebook and or YouTube. Have a great Tuesday, and we'll talk real soon.